Hello and welcome to episode 156 of the Mark and Me podcast. As always, I'm your host Mark. Joining me on today's episode is the writer, producer and director Jenna Bass. We get to sit down with Jenna and talk all about her career so far. We get to talk all about her brand new title Flatland, which is an amazing film and I urge you all to go out and check it out. It's an incredible concept and one of the best westerns I've seen, but it's with a twist. But as always, I won't spoil it, I won't go into much detail because I want you to go in there and enjoy the film completely fresh without any spoilers. But before we get to the interview with me and Jenna, let's touch base and talk about my last episode. I was joined by Laura Mary Carter from the amazing band Blood Red Shoes. It was a great chat, it was her second appearance on the podcast and so good to catch up. I love their new music and I can't wait to go and see them next year. If you haven't at this point listened to that interview, go back and check it out. It's on all the streaming channels and all the podcast networks you can name, and I urge you to go and get a ticket to see Blood Red Shoes. They're an amazing band and Laura Mary Carter is an amazing person. But let's get back to today's episode. It's been about a week and that's quite long for Mark and me, and I've got a brand new episode for you. As I just said, I'm joined by the director Jenna Bass. It's a great chat and I really can't wait to share it. So I think the best thing to do right now is to get straight to it. So here's me and Jenna talking all things film. So Jenna, thanks for joining me today on the Mark and Me podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
For the listeners out there today that are tuning in, that are maybe discovering your work for the first ever time, what I'd like to do is give those people an idea of what made you become the director you are today. So let's take it right back to the early days. Can you remember when you were growing up, those early films you saw or actors, or what basically made you fall in love with film and cinema?
I came to cinema quite late, actually. I didn't watch a lot of movies growing up because I was very sensitive kid. So most movies were too scary for me. I went to I had to walk out of Power Rangers, the movie, because I was too scared. I don't know if you ever saw it, but the whole thing with parents being turned into zombies, I couldn't handle it. It was too much for me. I really loved my parents, so I couldn't deal with it. So I didn't watch a lot of movies. I watched a lot of, my parents were also quite strict with TV, so I didn't even watch a lot of TV. I loved like the cartoons that I watched. I was like a massive fan of the animated Ewoks. I used to do a lot of kind of fan fiction in my head of the Ewoks, if you can imagine such a thing. I wasn't really into cinema until later in my teens when my dad was a big cinema fan, and when I became older, he gradually introduced me to film. And I think the first kind of grown-up movie I watched was The Usual Suspects.
Wow.
Really, really loved that. I think that was the first time I'd seen people being shot and dying and stuff. So it made a very big impression on me, and I really loved it. And I think that was a big one for me. And also as a teenager, I made a friend in high school who was a big fan of the golden era of cinema and introduced me to a lot of older films that I just didn't know about film history. And that also kind of just opened my mind up to things like that. So it was only really when I was about 16 or so that I think filmmaking became something that I wanted to do. And it made a lot of sense to me because up until that point, I'd really loved storytelling and I'd been interested in a whole lot of things, and I couldn't really make up my mind what I wanted to do with my life. I'd kind of wanted to do something that would allow me to do everything. And making films, I realized, was a way of being a scientist of everything. You could study, you get to study life basically. So it kind of all went from there.
And was it quite joyous for your father then that it was big into film, the fact that his daughter then wanted to go out there and try and make films and become a director and a writer? Was it kind of yes, because some parents wouldn't support that. Some parents would rather get a proper qualification and then fall back on something like a hobby that might be filmmaking or be a musician. How did it work out with that relationship with your parents?
My parents have always been extremely supportive. They're both doctors, and they were both were encouraged by their parents to do the safe option, and they both also created people who kind of became doctors because it was the thing you did. So they've always, both myself and my sister have always been very much like do what you want to do. And I think actually they would have let us do anything as long as we didn't want to become doctors.
Yeah.
So they were very supportive. And yeah, especially my dad always like was, because he has this real love of cinema and like especially westerns actually. He was always like trying to get me to watch westerns, which is over a very long period kind of what ended up being why Flatland got made.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. Like he's like the biggest fan. He's actually an executive producer on my most recent film that I'm just finished recently. So he's a big supporter. And my mom is always, as well.
That's amazing. It's kind of quite similar to me. So my father, his favourite films of all time are westerns. So when I was growing up, we'd sit there, but you don't realise now, looking back, how long those films were. We would sit there for 3 or 4 hours watching these, shootouts. And I don't know how I had the patience as a kid, but I remember sitting there watching stuff like Unforgiven and these classics, The Good, Bad and the Ugly. And they went on for hours.
Yeah, and especially like the Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I think the version I watched for the first time was the director's cut. So It's even longer.
That's testing your patience well.
Yeah, I just was like, I just remember like being blown away by that film and just loving it. But I think the ones up until then that he showed me, I didn't really get them. Like I could see that he loved them, but I didn't quite understand. And then I saw The Good, the Bad and the Ugly. I was like, oh, I understand westerns now. Like now I see what you love so much.
Yeah. So at what point did it become a reality that you could then go and make these films? Because obviously you're looking at being a writer and producer and director and all the sort of films that you wanted to get involved in. But at what point did it become something that wasn't just a thought or a kind of a wish, and it became reality that you could then start being creative and creating these films?
I think, I'm a very like, if I can't do something or if I can't like act on something, I like immediately I get very frustrated. So as soon as like I decided that filmmaking was something that I wanted to do, it was kind of immediately like, okay, I'm going to do it now, regardless of whether I had the skill or the knowledge or the budget or anything. So pretty much as soon as I could, so my first job I had was actually working as a magician at like children's parties.
Oh, wow.
And I saved up from doing that to buy my first like little HD cam video camera. And from then on, I was like just filming everything and making little short films. And I went to film school, and I was like still like on the weekends, like forcing my friends to like act in my little terrible films. And, I like those things were awful. But I mean, with hindsight, you look back and it's like that kind of just constant practice and immersion is like, just also just proves to you that like you don't need permission to go off and do something. And I think that was then something that film school sort of and the film industry kind of drills into you, that you need to be given permission to, and you need to be given like X, Y, and Z tools or X, Y, and Z resources in order to make your film. Whereas in fact, that's not true. Like, yes, there are some like quite major barriers to entry to the film industry. Well, and just to filmmaking, you need something to record with and you need something to edit on. But what those are like really could be anything. And I kind of like for quite some time after graduating was trying to kind of get to that point where someone was like, a cool green light, you can make your film. And eventually kind of just realized like that wasn't going to happen unless I just did it for myself, because I was just kind of getting this thing I think a lot of young filmmakers or emerging filmmakers get a lot, which is that, oh, we love your script, we love your idea, we love you, we love everything, but you haven't made a film, so sorry, we can't support you. So there's this vicious circle of like, so eventually I was just like, I guess I'll just make my own film. And so my first feature was like completely guerrilla, like done with a tiny budget. I did most things myself. And that just made the next one a little bit easier, and then the next one a little bit easier. And that's kind of like,
it's like getting those first ones under your belt, isn't it? To at least say to someone, well, actually, you love my ideas, but I've proven that I can do it all by myself on a shoestring budget. Now take me seriously.
Yeah, I mean, they still kind of don't, but it's a cumulative, like after, there's still like a billion people who's going to say no. I mean, it's, even once you've made the first film and then you're pitching your next one, they're like, and you're like, yeah, but I've made one before. They're like, yeah, but that one was, a low budget one. How are you going to make a bigger budget? There's people always looking for reasons. And I think especially, I think it is just also, it's a little bit harder when, you're a woman or you're young or you present to be either of those things, it's, people don't really take you seriously. It's, you kind of just have to like, at some point, just not look for people's approval, because it's not going to come.
Yeah. And are you seeing a bit of a change in the way that the industry is looking upon women as directors now? Because it shouldn't even be a topic we should have to discuss in this modern world, but we do get a point where the market in the industry is filled with so much male directors. The fact that this year at the Oscars we had Promising Young Woman, and we had many more female directors getting a name for themselves, and it was so good to see such a varied range and slate of directors and producers and actresses and everything else. But are you starting to see that there is a slight change now, and there's going to be more people open to the suggestions of, doesn't matter who the director is, it doesn't matter about the sex, the race, they are just being taken more seriously?
I mean, I appreciate you saying it's something that we shouldn't even really have to discuss, because I do often, especially when it comes to talking about Flatland, like
Yeah.
often the discussion becomes like, so as a woman, how are you as a woman
Yeah,
doing it? And and it is quite exhausting, and frustrating, because sometimes you just want to talk about the film,
of
and
course.
the film does not represent all women, and I don't represent all women. So thank you for saying that. Um, yeah, I think things are changing, and a lot of that change is very gratifying. Yeah, I mean, there are still, I mean, yeah, there's still a long way to go. And I think, it's still, the women who are getting these opportunities are still, predominantly white. And I think, there is still there's still quite a hierarchy of in the power structure that like still definitely needs to be interrogated. But yeah, things are changing. I don't feel I get quite as much as the same pushback as I used to. But yeah, um,
At least
yeah,
steps
I
are
don't know,
being
it's still
made in the
there.
right, at least steps are being made in the right direction. At least we're not taking steps back, because that's just, we don't need that right now in this industry.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, and things are changing, and yeah, I do feel like we are starting to move past those conversations, even if we're still having them,
Of
maybe more than
course.
we would like. Yeah.
And we've mentioned a couple of times today, and obviously we're here to promote Flatland. Now, this is basically I'm trying to sum it up. It'd be, I never like to spoil films for people or series or anything, because when people listen, I don't want to. But it is a contemporary western, really, isn't it? Like you've mentioned today. And how did this idea come about for you, and how did it all become, to getting greenlit and making this product that you wanted, that invested so much time in?
Yeah, so I mean, it kind of does go back to like watching those westerns with my dad, and at first kind of like not getting them, and then starting to enjoy them. And when I graduated film school, I was kind of like looking around for like, what's my big feature going to be? I kind of wanted to make like Apocalypse Now, or like The Good, the Bad, the Ugly. That was like kind of like where I was at in my head in terms of the kind of films I liked, and also just like my delusions of grandeur that I had about myself. And I had taken recently, like at the time, a train trip through the Karoo, which is the area that you see in the film.
Yeah.
And I looked around, I was like, wow, this would make like such a great setting for a Western. And I kind of just started thinking about making a Western set in the Karoo. And I didn't really realize that actually there was quite a history of that area being used in Western films in the 60s and 70s. In a very kind of different context, but it kind of, there was actually a tradition of westerns in that area that I didn't know about at the time. But when I started working on trying to come up with a western, I started to ask myself like, what was it about the western that interested me, and why was I doing it, etc. And I kind of like was thinking about all the westerns that I loved, and realized like there were never any characters specifically that I felt I could connect to, and start to think about like why I'd really resisted enjoying westerns with my dad, where like in all other genres like I didn't have that issue. And and then I started to realize maybe it is just because there's never anyone who looks like me in them, or when there is, they're standing on the doorstep waving off the cowboy, and or they're being rescued, or they're being shot or something, like the female presence in the Western is very, very, very minimal historically, even though obviously it is there. And just start to be like, well, what is it about this genre that makes it so macho? And is it inherent in the genre? Is it something the genre? Is it just the fact that Westerns are about men? They have to be about men? Or what would change about this genre? Or would anything change if women were the main characters? So started to kind of think about it in that sense. And then it kind of grew from there, and evolved quite organically over, the very long period of time it took to get it made.
I mean, the concept is so original, so fresh, and it's so good to see. What was the setbacks, or was it quite good once you'd cast and got the production in place? Was there any kind of learning points where you thought, oh, I didn't think about this, or something? You know, there's always surprise elements, isn't there, when you're directing and producing a film? But was there anything that was a major setback, or was it quite nice and steady?
The process of making the film, I think, for me was actually smoother than I would have expected. There was like all the usual problems of like, not having enough money and not having enough
Yeah.
resources and, all of that. That was frustrating. But for me, having like this was at, the time was my third feature film that I'd made, but it was the by far the biggest, most resourced, even despite the fact that we didn't have enough money and everything was extremely tight and we really had to make a lot of compromises, which I wish we didn't have to make. It was still the biggest kind of project I'd worked on. And so from that sense, it felt very comfortable compared to my previous two films, which were literally just like me with the camera most of the time and a few other people. So from that perspective, I kind of expected to, it was also a return to more traditional filmmaking for me because my previous two films had been unscripted and more collaborative with the cast and a lot of improv. And so this was going back to a script. And so I expected to not enjoy it as much as I actually ended up doing. And it helped me actually kind of get back into kind of the traditions of filmmaking that I'd started off doing and enjoying those again, and like the planning and preparation that goes into that and being more disciplined overall. I think the biggest challenges are really actually, in getting it to that point of getting it made, where
Yeah.
people didn't get it. We were pitching the film and they'd be like, this isn't a Western. And I'll be like, why isn't it a Western? And they're like, well, because women. And, I'm like, are you saying,
Yeah.
and like, or I'd be like, well, what is a Western to you? And, they're like, oh, I'm like, exactly. Is it guys wearing funny hats? Because if that's all it is, like, is that a genre? Like, I don't know if hats and men are like, and horses are enough to classify something as a genre, like other genres are about a lot more than that. So, that, and then also people being like, well, if it's a Western with women, they've got to be lesbians, or like, like crazy, weird concepts that people have about like what women must do in film. So, yeah, and then getting compared to Thelma and Louise a lot, and being like, is that really your only point of reference? That's very sad. So that was very challenging and demoralizing a lot of the time. But once we actually kind of got to the point where we were making it, there was less, people, making those comments at that point. So yeah.
It's shocking, isn't it? People are still like that. I don't know. It blows my mind that you've got to still have those conversations. And what makes a Western? It has to be a typical group of white men on horses, and that's it. If it's outside of that, it's not a Western. It just angers me still.
Yeah, I mean, I still like, even when the film, when it was finished, people still resisted calling it that. And yeah, it is also a road movie and it is also a coming of age story, but it's not a Western. And yeah, I don't know. I think genre is so much more interesting than just the absolute basic rules of whatever that genre is. Like I don't enjoy. I love genre of cinema, but I don't
Yeah.
like genre of cinema which is just about the rules. So yeah, I don't know. That's my opinion.
One question I ask everyone that comes on the podcast, and it doesn't matter if it's a writer, a director, a producer, or even a musician, but something that I like is that a lot of the listeners to the podcast are up and coming people that want to get into the industry or make a name for themselves. Now, what advice do you give for anyone that wants to be a film director or a writer like yourself to try and stand above everyone else and get their work seen in a world that is so hard to be seen in?
I guess a few things. I mean, the first thing kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier, which is like, don't wait for permission.
Yeah.
Is like, you have to give yourself permission because, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, like, to make a project of a certain size or, something, you're going to need that support and you're going to have to ask for it. You won't be able to do it on your own. But, if you're waiting to get started, or you're waiting to like learn the ropes, like that's the point where like you can't wait. Like you're only going to get better when you're doing. And that's always what freaks me out, is the time in between projects when I'm not making something, not because it's like I just want to be busy, but because I'm not getting any better while I'm waiting. So I
Yeah.
think that's like a big thing, is if you aren't able to get your dream job or to direct your dream project right now, don't wait for that to happen, or don't wait for the stars to align, because they probably won't until you kind of start anyway, and then you'll find they kind of start aligning after that. So I think that, and then I mean, I think also knowing what advice to take and what not to take, because you're going to get a lot of it, and a lot of people telling you to do this and to do that, and this won't work, and this way, this will work, and this is how things operate, and there's like a billion voices out there. And at the end of the day, also you're going to have to decide for yourself, and really kind of like own those decisions, because a lot of people will say, well, no one wants to watch a film in your local language, like no one wants to do that, like it, but maybe they do. And I think that a lot of the times there's a million reasons not to do something, and you just have to do it and make the mistakes and then make another one, and don't fixate on this one project being the thing that's going to make or break your entire career. I think we kind of put a lot of pressure on first-time directors to like be perfect, and that's insane, really. I mean, everyone should be able to make mistakes and then make another one. So
I love the rawness of a first release. Someone like Kevin Smith with Clerks. I love the faults. I love the cheap feel. I love the fact that he's made it with his money from a comic book collection, and at times you can see a reflection of the cameraman and all. I love all that. It's raw, it's real, it's how it should be. And then I love seeing the later work that's then polished, and you've seen that they've kind of had this journey of learning along the way. Yeah,
no, absolutely. I mean, I mean, I try not to be, because I used to be really hard on myself, and like look at those things, mistakes, and think like, oh, I'm so terrible, and like, well, what am I really basing that of? Is like, I've never done this before, I'm learning. And I think, and the only way to learn it is to do it. And I mean, I could have spent 10 years being a PA on a commercial set or something like that, and I could have learned that way, but I honestly don't think that would have taught me the things that I needed to know about storytelling, which is really the most important thing, rather than how to call action and cut, so definitely still, like, I totally think I'm still learning. There's a lot I still have to learn, but I'll have to make another film to find out what that is.
And my final question for you today is, and I'm going to put you on the spot now, is what we do on the podcast to make it quite original is the outro music is chosen by the guest that's been on that episode, so we keep it quite original that way. Is there a song that you love that would stand above any other song? It can be from a film, a score, or just a song by a band that you absolutely love that would be a perfect outro song that would sum you up, or that you dearly hold close to you, that would be your choice. So when I'm asking the question, it's usually the one that comes to your heart straight away, and that we finish the episode with today.
Okay, I have an answer.
I love that. Most people want 5 or 10 minutes, and then they email me later and say, actually, I've had a bit of a think and I want to change it. But the fact that you've got it now is music to my ears.
Okay, no, I can give you the answer now. So, maybe I can't, because I don't actually know what it's called, but I can definitely get you the name. So it's the theme song from Tears of the Black Tiger. So that's a film that like I absolutely love, and I love that song, and it's a Western. So
I think it fits perfectly with what we discussed today.
Cool.
It's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today, Jenna, and I'm really excited to see what the future holds. I'm really, really excited. So I look forward to hopefully speaking to you again in the future, and good luck with everything at the moment.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
So there it is. There's my interview with me and Jenna Bass. An amazing person, an amazing future ahead of her, and it was so good to sit down and talk more about Flatline. It's an amazing film, it's a contemporary western, and it's a journey of the best filmmaking out there. Please go and check it out, and as always, jump onto markandme.com and let me know your thoughts on this movie. I absolutely love it when I see that people can discover new albums, books or films from this podcast, and then they go and enjoy it, and to let me know is honestly one of my favourite things and the reason I do the podcast, so please do that. As always, if you've enjoyed today's episode, all I ask is you share it. It costs nothing to do. All the links are on Mark and Me to Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And for you guys out there, once you've listened, to hit that share button and share it on your own page or your own Twitter account or your own Facebook page makes a massive difference. All those people that are your followers or your friends, they can see the link and might just check it out and become a huge fan of the podcast. And that's all I can ask for. If you've really enjoyed today's episode or you're a big fan of Mark and Me, you can support me on my Patreon page. Every month I go out of my way to make sure I give those guys that support me on Patreon the best prizes in the business. Thanks to the amazing guys at Vice Press, I have amazing prints, some stuff that you can't buy, some very rare variant prints, and much more. Also, because the Last Exit to Nowhere, the best t-shirt company out there, each and every month I have 2 t-shirts to give away. Girls on Tops are also around. They're giving me some amazing stuff, and this is all to say thank you for supporting me on Mark and Me. The Patreon page is there on markandme.com. You can sign up for as little as £1 a month, and honestly, you're in for a chance to win some amazing prizes. The money you invest in Mark and Me goes right back into the podcast to allow me to record more and more episodes, which gives you guys at home more and more podcasts. I never make money from it, and I invest it all right back into the actual Mark and Me podcast, so please keep it coming. It makes a huge difference, and I can't do this podcast without that support. I've had about a week off, and I haven't been too well, but I feel great now, and I can't wait for the next few weeks ahead. September is going to be absolutely manic, and I've got some amazing stuff coming up. So stay tuned, because in a few days' time I'll be back with a brand new episode. So until then, please look after yourself, take care of each other, and I'll speak to you all in a few days' time.
ลิขิตบันดาลชักพาดลให้มาพบกันทันใดก่อนนี้อยู่กันแสนไกลพรหมลิขิตดลจิตใจฉันจึงได้มาใกล้กับเธอชะลอยเธอเป็นเนื้อคู่ควรอุ้มชูเลี้ยงดูบำเรอแต่ครั้งแรกเมื่อพบเธอใจนึกเชื่อเมื่อแรกเจอฉันและเธอคือคู่สร้างมาเนื้อคู่ถึงอยู่แสนไกลคงไม่คลาดพลามุ่งหวังสมดังอุราไม่ว่าใครใครหากไม่ใช่คู่ครองแท้จริงจะแอบอิงรักยิ่งปานใดอยากนักที่จะสมใจคงพบเหตุอาเพศภัยพลัดกันไปทำให้คลาดคลาเราสองคนต้องเป็นเนื้อคู่จึงชื่นชูรักใครบูชานี่เพราะว่าบุญหนุนพาผมลิขิตขีดเส้นมาชี้ชะตาให้มารวมกันคนบางคนต้องเป็นเนื้อคู่เพียงแต่ดูรู้ชื่อโดยพลันก็รู้สึกนึกรักกันจนฝันใฝ่ใจผูกพันแม้ไม่ทันจะเห็นรูปกายฉันเชื่อเพราะเมื่อพบเธอฉันเพ้อมากมายเฝ้าหลงพะวงไม่วายไม่นายกมลพรหมลิขิตบันดาลทุกอย่างเป็นผู้วางหนทางปวงชนได้ลิขิตชีวิตคนนำเนื้อคู่มาเปลอปลนทั้งยังดลเธอให้กับฉัน